So I just did a video on Colin Kaepernick and his contract with Nike. I thought I'd do a video more on the NFL anthem protest in general and just my feelings on it. So first off, of course, I believe they have the right to protest whatever they want. It's America. You have free speech. If you don't want to stand for the anthem, that's fine. However, other people have the right to turn off your program or to not support you if you do this. And your employer has the right to tell you you can't do something like that. I can't make certain protests at my place of work, just like almost everyone watching this can't. If our employer says, hey, you can't say that or you can't do that, you either have the choice to leave the company because you feel your protest is more important, or they have the right to fire you, or you can stop your protest and do it off the works, off your time when you're working. So Kaepernick and everyone else had the chance to do this off the field when it wasn't part of the national anthem, but they chose not to. Now, maybe it was strategically made more sense for them to do it and be more visible during the anthem, but as I showed in the Kaepernick video specifically, this protest originally, he said it was about protesting the flag in the country because he didn't want to support a flag or a country that oppressed black people. And then he specifically goes into the reason is these police shootings. Well, one of the things that upsets me is you see so much of even the sports media at this point is very liberal, very virtue signaling and social justice. So they prop this up and just say they have the right to say this and they have a point and we should fight racism. I agree, we should fight racism. I'm 100% down with that. But I don't understand how protesting the flag is a way of protesting racism unless you're saying, as Kaepernick did, that the flag is inherently symbolizes some form of racism that occurs in this country. I don't think the flag does symbolize that, and I think that people that are upset that that harms our military service and any other people, even in a non-military capacity that have served this country and worked to make this country have the right to feel that way. Now, if you don't feel that way, that's fine too, but I'm just saying, you should be able to clearly see when Kaepernick comes out and says, oh, the flag represents a racist country, how people would interpret that is, oh, so you're saying the people that fought for that flag did a bad thing and you're protesting them. I'm just saying that's easy to see how people could feel that way. Secondly, no one ever wants to talk specifically about the issue anyways. Yes, it's fine to stand up and say we should fight racist. I agree with that. The question is the criticism that Kaepernick and the rest are making actually a fair criticism? Their claim is that unarmed black men are being shot consciously by police, like intentionally, and that this is somehow indicative of racism. Well, it turns out that the best study on this was done in 2006. I'll link it. New York Times piece discusses it, but it's from a Harvard professor. The best study on this shows that actually, when you look at the evidence, unarmed black people were actually slightly less likely to be shot than unarmed white people. Now, it also says that we shouldn't say that. Basically, the data was so close that you couldn't say one race over another was more likely to be shot when they're unarmed. No one wants to discuss this, though. It's just assumed because the media plays up these stories that are just like, oh, another unarmed black person was shot by the police, but they don't ever play up when an unarmed white person shot by the police. So you get this discrepancy where it looks like we have a country where it's just police officers shooting unarmed black people left and right, and that's just not the case. And it also assumes that if someone's unarmed, then they shouldn't have got shot. Now, I agree. The circumstances seem to have to be very dire for an unarmed man to get shot, but they certainly could exist. Just because someone's unarmed doesn't mean they couldn't be strong arm attacking a victim, someone like an elderly person, a woman, a child, or anyone for that matter that might be in dire need of help, or they could be charging the police who are in fear. But again, it's just the assumption, it's just the talking point, oh, an unarmed black person was shot, so therefore it must have been racism, and that just doesn't seem to be the case when we analyze the data. The other thing is, and this is very difficult because people want to, when you start talking numbers, people just want to accuse you of being a racist if you're talking about numbers that they don't like, but I'm not racist at all, and I'm totally comfortable talking about this. The numbers show that actually a lot of these communities where inner city black communities, there happens to be a lot of violent crime. In fact, studies show that most murders occur in these small cities. For example, the vast geographical area of the United States, it doesn't have many murders occurring. They're occurring in these very small areas. A lot of them happen to be areas where African Americans live. Does that mean that I think that like African Americans are automatically going to commit more crime or more murder? Absolutely not. Whatever the reason is, they are in these situations, we're in these communities where there's a lot of violence. So if you're a cop and you're going into an area where there's a lot of violence, the chances you'll resort to violence, whether it be legitimately or illegitimately, is significantly raised. For example, the small town I live in, there are black gentlemen that live here, black ladies that live here. They're never getting guns pulled on them by the police. It's because it's a calm neighborhood. There's not much violent crime that occurs. And so no one thinks, oh, well, I'm pulled. The cops don't think I have to be in this life and death situation where I may have to pull my firearm. These communities where the inner cities are coming, where a lot of these shootings happen, they are violent communities, and the police are more on edge. And I'm sure if they pull over white people in those neighborhoods, they would be equally on edge. I could be wrong about this, but it just seems to make sense that if you're in a community where there's a lot of violence, particularly gang violence, as a police officer, you're going to be more jumpy and maybe resort to violence. Now, does this mean that this excuses when there's a bad shooting by the police? Absolutely not. We should focus on that regardless of skin color. But to just jump on the conclusion, and you see other people doing this. There was a Democratic politician the other week that slipped, I can't remember exactly what it was, but was like, oh, the law enforcement in this country is racist. The people that work in it are racist. And that seems to be the talking point to jump onto. Now, all of this is just because white cops hate black people, and so that's why they're shooting people. And I think that's absurd. I think it's overly simplistic, and it doesn't do due diligence looking at the evidence of what's actually going on, which ends up then brings a lot of animosity. I think there is room to criticize a lot of police officers. I don't know if a lot would be the right, but there's certainly room to criticize some police officers that act poorly. And I think that transcends race. And I think that Black Lives Matter made a huge mistake trying to focus just specifically on the race, because then it alienates people. I don't think the reason is just simply, oh, the police are racist, that's the reason. That ignores perhaps like the militarization of the police, or the difficult and stressful situations they're put in, or all kinds of reasons, real reasons we could look at and why this happens. But instead we gloss all over that and want to say racism. So, I get, and if I would probably, if I lived in a black community and I was black and I saw what's going on in the media, I probably too would be upset and think, wow, are these police just out there targeting unarmed black men? But I don't think the numbers bear that out. And I at least think it's worth a conversation as opposed to just all the media jumping on one side, including the sports media, I believe, jumping on one side saying, yeah, it is true. What these players are saying is true. The police are very racist and there is a problem with this. Like, they don't even want to have the debate. They keep saying we need to have a conversation, yet no conversation ever happens. It's just guilty as charged for the police. It's okay to bash the entire police force because we're virtue signaling that we're somehow good people. So that's my take on the numbers of that. Now, there's also some other things that are ridiculous about this, like something I haven't really heard anyone talked about, and I don't have a source for this, but I listen to a lot of sports radio, and I've heard this mentioned. What is the NFL going to do with their policy for kneeling for the national anthem? And understand, I don't blame the players for being upset because the owners kind of made a decision without consulting the players' union. So if I was a player, I'd be upset too. But at the end of the day, the owners own the team, so they can do what they want. They're the employers. They set the rules. Anyways, so I get the NFLPA being upset that they weren't consulted, and so now it's kind of been rolled back, and it's in the middle. We're still not sure what the NFL is going to say about this kneeling. But I heard a lot of sports talk people say, with seemingly a lot of confidence, one compromise that they could make is they say, the NFL says you can't kneel during the national anthem. However, we will extremely lax our policy on marijuana use, which, by the way, I am for. Not only the lax of the NFL's, I think it's absurd that they punish people for using marijuana when you can inject morphine into your other painkillers to go out and play. So I think they should relax those standards. And I also, as someone who leans libertarian, I'm for the legalization of marijuana anyways, but that's neither here nor there. The point that I'm making here is, what a principled protest by these NFL players who would totally be willing to give it up as long as they could smoke a little weed. Isn't that absurd? And that's big. Everyone agrees, yeah, that would be a compromise going to work. So apparently they really care about this issue, right? So much so that they're going to stand by it until, I don't know, they're allowed to smoke weed on off days or something like that. Just proves the absurdity. Last thing I'll say about this is another thing that I never really heard here talked about. You hear all these sports media people and media people in general say, free speech, it's all about free speech. The league should support this free speech. Well, there's a little known story. I believe it was 2 years ago. There was a guy named Steve Clevenger who played in Major League Baseball. And he tweeted out that he thought that a bunch of these people that were in a Black Lives Matter rally that were I don't know if they were part of Black Lives Matter or if they were but they were rioting, and there was a bunch of bad stuff coming. Well, he tweeted out a link to like some of these riots, or an article about some of these riots, and said they were acting like animals. He was actually suspended by his team because that was an offensive thing to say. Where were all the free speech advocates there? I don't remember that, right? He gets suspended, but not a peep said. So it's not, when these people were saying, oh, we're defending free speech, Kaepernick has the right to say this, all these players have the right to kneel, right? They're not really saying that. They're saying they have the right to say things that we agree with. But as soon as someone would come out and do something they disagree with, right? As soon as someone would come out and just tweet, not during a game, mind you. It wasn't like Clevenger was protesting during a game or during the national anthem. No, this was just on his own private Twitter. Yet he wasn't, where was the media to defend his right to free speech? Not a peep, because it's not the virtue signaling thing to do. It's not the correct side of the social justice argument to be on. So therefore, their agreement with free speech goes out the window as soon as it's speech that they don't like. It just goes to prove that the whole thing's disingenuous. So at the end of the day, my big stance on the protest, I really don't like Trump tweeting about it, to be honest. I think that it's ridiculous. He has more important things to do as a president. But my stance on the NFL protests are, dude, I do a lot of reading and politics and things like that. I like to turn on football on Sundays because I just want something stupid to watch and shove a bunch of food in my face, be super unhealthy, and just relax for a day. And instead, even there, I get beat over the head with more left-wing talking points, more America's not good. Just like when I go to the movies anymore. Just like when I listen to any artist, not any, but many artists that are singers or actors or actresses or producers or directors, or even now in video games, it's being beat with you over the head. Wouldn't it be nice to just go back to the days when entertainment was entertainment? You could watch a ball game and not hear a political message on either side. I think that would be great. So that's my feelings on the anthem, and you should, if you like this video, you should subscribe. Check out my other video on Colin Kaepernick and his endorsement with Nike.